Well, hello everyone and welcome to the panel otherwise known as Not Another Chat about utility business model reform. I know you've heard it time and time again that the utility business model is changing. We're moving from the traditional VI model to the, quote, future utility. And I know that you've probably sat on as many panels as you can count about this subject. Today we hope to illuminate with some real-world examples, some new ideas for you about how the utility business model is changing and how we are getting to the title of this panel, the future utility. I'm Gavin Bade. I'm the senior reporter at Utility Dive. We're a trade publication based in Washington, D.C. We report on the sector all across North America. And when I think about the future utility, it helps for me to kind of think about what isn't a future utility, what's the past, what's the traditional utility model. When I think about that, I usually think about a couple things. One is a straightforward, centralized, one-way grid, right? That was the way we thought about the utility sector when it first came to be and thought about it for almost a century. It was you had a generator, you had the transmission and distribution lines, and it went to someone's house, and it was very simple. The power flowed just like that. That obviously is not the case today. But when I think about traditional utilities, I also think about cost of service regulation. You know, to build those transmission lines, those generators, you know, the utility would charge their ratepayers and they would earn that rate of return. In a world where we don't have as many centralized generators, maybe that paradigm is going to shift a little bit. And the other thing I think about with traditional utilities is their mandate to serve. You know, for almost a century, we had, the utilities were under what I would say is a dual mandate, you know, safe, reliable service at affordable prices. And I think that it's, you know, incumbent on all of us in this sector to look at adding a third leg to that stool for the future utility. And that third leg to the stool is sustainability, realizing the realities of climate change, the other realities of environmental impacts of what we're doing, and integrating that into the utility process as well. So when I think of the future utility, it's moving past a model of centralized generation, of only cost of service regulation, and integrating more sustainability into our planning and our operations. I know that that is a very broad swath to paint there. So I want to turn to our panelists now so that they can tell us a little bit more what they think the future utility is from their standpoint. To my left, I've got Dan Bradley. He's at Navigant Consulting. To his left, Patrick Yim, not at Sempra, but Lee, sorry. I was thinking about my other friend Patrick. Works in the DC government, actually. In any case, he's at Sempra Energy and wears so many hats I can't really figure out what you do anymore, Pat. Okay. And then next to him, we've got Bill Hetherington, who is the CEO of the Bandera Electric Cooperative here in Texas. So Dan, do you want to start us out? You know, when you think future utility, what do you think?
Thanks, Gavin. You'll see on your seats, Navigant left behind a nice, light 55-page read called Energy Cloud 4.0 about our vision of what the future utility looks like. In 2014, we set out with a graphic. It was a cloud graphic, and it showed the customer in the middle and a bunch of things happening around it. And that was, you know, the foundational thought piece that we gathered ourselves around to think about what a future utility looks like. And this is our fourth year of putting this out, and this is our fourth rendition, and this one is on capturing the value of this future world that we look at. As Gavin led it up, what I think about a future utility, there's safe, reliable, affordable, that continues. Adding sustainability to it, that continues. But as we begin to get into a world driven by global forces, shaped by global forces, we're now looking at adding a couple more legs to the stool, as you put it. So flexible, autonomous, and individualized. And it's the basket of all of these legs of the stool which I think contribute to the future utility.
Okay, so, you know, in my perspective, I think utility in the beginning is already a complex business. You have asset, you know, installation, operation, you have customer service, you have multi-industry combined into one. But going forward, when you see a lot more distributed energy resources where you have more independent power producer at very different level, from transmission down to distribution level. And so the objective become more mixed, you know, like Gavin talked about. Well, it's not just about safe and reliable service anymore. It's not about secure data anymore. It's not about keeping costs reasonable anymore. That mixed objective become much more complex. And so when you look at how does a utility from already a complex organization transition to more of a service company? Because people no longer buy the electron with a wire. people no longer buy gas molecule. They want to buy services. They want to buy comfort, buy heat, right? So when utility need to transition to that future, we need to think about, well, how do we actually get there with the existing regulation that's on one hand protecting the utility, on the other hand is also importing the utility from competing in these open market when technology and markets are changing so fast, where utility wants to compete, but they don't have a way to do it. And the entry couldn't get in because the regulation is preventing them from getting in.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Bill, what about you?
Okay, to dovetail on to what Pat said. I think that it's really about the service, as you talk about. What we are is transitioning from a commodity-based business model to a service-based business model. And just to give you perspective, I joined Bandera Electric Cooperative in 2013. And at that time, we were selling like water heaters and surge protectors and things that electric utilities like to sell, right? And so I asked our customers, well, what do you want from us? Well, I want high-speed internet, and I want renewable energy alternatives. It's like, oh, okay. Well, now I guess as a member-owned electric utility, our whole mantra is let's provide our members what our members need. And so, I think early on, for us, it's been about, for the utility of the future, it's really going to be define the value that they bring to their customer. They have to define who their customer is and where they bring the best value. And so, for us, it was, it's very clear. Our members own us. And so if our members want high-speed internet, we're going to provide you a high-speed internet. And we are going to provide you renewable energy alternatives. So it's been very crystalline for us to make that transition. And I think that is where I see the digital future for utilities, is finding out where those values are that they can provide to their customers.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. And at the risk of tiring you out here, we had a great discussion over breakfast this morning about some of those new services that you're offering to your customers. Could you say a little more about the Wi-Fi and about some of the solar services that you're offering to them?
Sure. And I'll get on my soapbox just for a little bit and complain about Texas, because Texas ranks last in the United States for for rural areas having access to the internet, and it's just unacceptable. In 2015, I was driving home from work one day, and I noticed outside the public library there's a long line of kids, and usually kids are out doing what kids do, and I'm like, well, that's kind of odd. And I found out later, it's like, well, they were all standing in line waiting to use the computer that is connected to the internet because they don't have internet at home. And now, of course, on our educational system, it's all based on the internet. And I said, well, that's already a disadvantage. We're competing with, China and with other places, and we can't even get an internet connection. So we basically sat down with the county in Bandera County, and we basically decided to put in a free Wi-Fi system in the city of Bandera. So the city of Bandera becomes the first city with citywide free Wi-Fi in 2015. And now our kids can do their homework on walking down the street in the city of Bandera. So one thing led to another. We started then providing advice to customers who wanted to put on solar. And what would happen is people would hire somebody, they would put in the solar, and then 2 months afterward, they'd call us and say, well, hey, these guys said I wouldn't have an electric bill. What's the deal? I mean, your meter must be wrong, right? And how many of us in the utility industry have gotten the call, well, I'm sure that I didn't use this energy. I'm sure it must be your meter. Unfortunately, that's not the situation. Unfortunately, most of the time, people went in with an expectation of this and got this. So realistically, we were kind of pulled into actually providing a residential solar option for them that we would back for 25 years, that we would provide O&M. And the fact that we are a local community utility, they like that. Now, I'm saying we're not the cheapest in town, but they know that they get a peace of mind to know if there is an issue, they're going to call us. And again, it gets back to my view on philosophy as far as about the value that we're going to provide to that customer. So those are some of the things we've got into, and it's just kind of snowballed into microgrids and software and other things. But those are the real issues.
Thanks, Bill.
If I could jump in on that point, Bill, I like that story, and when thinking about the future utility and the opportunity that the utility has to serve that future, I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of value, but you also that trust. Right? There's a long duration trust factor there, and in a world of increasingly digitized IoT, there's the opportunity to capture that customer and guide them with that trust. Now, that is not an easy thing to do. There's global competition around that. And I think as we see, it's happening today with Alexa in the kitchen, devices and AI are shaping consumer decisions and consumer behaviors. And pretty soon, who knows, maybe, making small decisions for us if it can save us money here and there. Mm-hmm. But the trust at the core, along with articulating that value position and activating a customer, I think is what we're looking at in terms of a future utility.
What about you, Pat?
Yeah, I think the challenge is really, trying to define, everyone wants to improve their quality of life, but the definition varies a lot. Some people, cost is more important to them. Some people, access is more important to them. So I think in the end, even the industry is trying to figure out, well, where's the demarcation to a point where they want to own something versus they want to use something, right? We have seen how people now don't own cars because we have transportation services to provide that. People own less houses because they want to be more mobile, right? So we can shift to the world where you can say, you don't own your water heater, you don't own your refrigerator anymore. I just want to buy the refrigerating service and the heating service. So just give me a price that's equivalent to what I will be paying so that I'm more mobile. I don't have to be tied down by infrastructure, right? So I think we don't really know, because at the time you can say, well, if the commodity is low cost enough, people say, I don't care either way, I can take it because it's less trouble for me. But for some people say, I don't want to deal with a water heater leaking problem every 5 years. I just want to get a service to say, I want to be hassle-free.
So San Diegans could expect in the future that, they'll be renting their water heater from SDG&E?
I think if the regulation allow us to do it, I think we'll be transitioning to that.
Oh, really? Interesting. I'd love if you could talk a little bit about some of the EV stuff that you guys are doing in California. That's such a big, for SDG&E, it's such a big opportunity for utilities to kind of capture a new rate base there. Yeah,
I think if you look at the, an overall picture of a utility, right? We're seeing erosion just from energy efficiency, improvement of appliances, and then you have a lot of solar rooftop that coming on, right? That displays the throughput in the utility. And that also impacts the energy delivery of the system in terms of utilization. So utility are challenged by, hey, I had erosion in throughput, I had erosion in demand charge. At the same time, there's also opportunity in terms of new electric vehicle push, particularly in California, trying to push for 25%, 50%, and eventually to 100% EV. Right? And so if you think about each electric vehicle is almost equal to a house in terms of consumption of energy. That's a big opportunity. But where do they popped up could be a challenging problem for the utility, right? No difference than the reverse of generation, right? All of a sudden you have generation occurring everywhere, and now you have low occurring anywhere, anytime. So having a technology can actually manage and balance that to become very important, right? And so in San Diego, I think we are probably one of the highest EV penetration in California. Also, so as we have a lot of penetration in terms of solar roof as well. More than 10% of the energy are produced by the solar roof in San Diego. And we just reached over 43% renewable recently. So I think we have now installing, a plan to install over 1,000 charger system, public charger system as part of, supported by the Public Utility Commission to do that. And I think this consideration now also looking at, hey, is there opportunity to install bi-directional chargers that allow for a vehicle to grid benefit? So I would say the market is wide open in terms of electric vehicle, because I think many people are experimenting, well, what kind of business model would that be? I think utility also trying to figure out, well, how do we work with the partners out there that are providing these technologies so that we can coexist and work together?
Yeah, but I would say that to carry on with that, it's going to be real important that the utility be involved in that discussion. Because I'll tell you right now, what happens is we're last to the discussion, and guess what happens? We're faced now with in a situation. I'll give you an example here in ERCOT in Texas, where you have 23,000 solar PVs that are unregistered. So nobody knows where they're at, and all of a sudden on a cloudy day in the late spring, the load starts to go, and nobody knows why. And the same situation is going to happen with electric vehicles if we don't get out ahead of it, if we don't have mechanisms in place to understand how they're getting dispersed, how they get integrated. Like you mentioned in your last thing, it has to be an integrated solution because that's really where the benefit is. So we're going to have to figure out how we get in a discussion. So it's an integrated solution.
I think one of the challenge I observe, I think particularly in US, right, because the way we contract a service for residential customers, well, you have a large 200 amp meter that can draw a lot of power from the utility, but you're not paying for the full capacity that you're connecting to, right? So I think if you look at other countries like Japan and other, well, they segmentize how much you're contracting for. You can only draw so much from the grid based on your connection. So I think we need to start looking at that so that it's almost same for the internet service, right? Everyone want unlimited bandwidth, right? As opposed to, well, I only want to pay for how many gigabytes of throughput. Same issue, right? I think on the power grid we have a similar problem that we have to solve that problem.
So I think we're starting to naturally go into some of the operational issues that this transition to a service model, the future utility, more of a service than commodity model, some of the operational issues it poses. Dan, I wonder, just on a broad swath, as we move toward more distributed resources, more connectivity across the grid, what do you guys see as some of the broad operational issues that these future utilities will have to face?
So from an operational issue, I guess in one way I can think about a utility and divide it up into its component parts. And you have core regulated grid activity, right? And that is a platform for all these devices. We used to think about it in terms of energy and financial flows, and now data is probably near the top of that. Capturing that data on that and using that core platform as an important investment, transitioning it to two-way power flows and enabling other capabilities for it. But the second piece of the utility that I think about is almost opening it up API-like to products and services, whether that comes from within the regulated utility, outside of the regulated utility, and unregulated affiliates or networks of partners. In New York right now, Navigant, we're working on a project with NYSERDA called Rev Connect, and it's a program that was set up to catalyze Rev in the marketplace and connect companies interested in working with utilities in a partnership back to, say, the Con Eds of the world or the Avangrids and the national grid. And in working through these network partnerships, what we find is that at the very core of evolving this model is something that is so simple to all of us. It's terminology. It's how we describe value and articulate value. And it's some of the core tenets of electric utilities in terms of protecting customer data, security, affordability. Combining that together into a partnership, I think, is one of the key ways that I see this evolving. And in some ways it's difficult, and in some ways it's remarkably easy. It just takes some work to kind of put the glue together to stitch it together.
What do you guys think? How is the distributed resource explosion in California's case? How is it affecting the way SDG&E operates its system?
Right. Yeah, I think when you have distributed resources that are not well coordinated, that's a big challenge by itself, right? So when you see interconnected grid across everywhere, and then now you add, distributed resources that you don't coordinate very well. One is, well, can you really find some technologies that can really help coordinate that? And what is that technology, right? So those are some of the things that we're working on.
I understand you developed one of those technologies?
Yeah, so we actually have a startup company that invented this new technology that's GPS based that we can actually now do better time synchronization and control of distributed resources. I don't want to,
He didn't know I was going to ask him that. So,
but I think at the end of the day, I think there's going to be many solutions. It's going to be based on what's the cost to achieve, right? Because you're going to have solutions to say, well, that inefficiency is not even worth the cost to get to, right? It depends on where are you really deploying in area that's cost effective today, right? For example, I'll give you an example of an island, let's say, right? Today, you're paying for mostly diesel generation on an island like American Samoa. Let's say, the fuel cost just on the diesel alone is 16 cents to 22 cents per kilowatt hours. You're paying less than that in Florida like 12 cents or 11 cents, right? So when you add on top of the generation and delivered services, right, it's 35 cents and a barrel for a kilowatt hour of energy in American Samoa. But today, if you can deploy distributed resources, solar rooftop plus energy storage at less than 11 or 12 cents, well, there's no reason for the utility to exist in American Samoa. You can just bring in a technology that can actually coordinate these resources and operate there, right? So I think there are different parts of the world based on the technology that you implement, become lower hanging fruit for that technology to survive, and then transition to pockets of large grid where you have similar problem. Because when you think about a large grid with large wind generation or solar generation in a regional that are creating a lot of problem, like in Idaho or Wyoming, a lot of wind generation, the grid managers are having problem dealing with these intermittency problems, right? Mm-hmm. So technology like that can be now applied to those areas to help solve those localized problems. Mm-hmm. And it really just helped us to transition to maybe lower cost renewable that's been subsidized for some time to now is surviving on their own, right? So it's no longer policy driven. Now it's totally economics driven renewable, not policy driven renewable.
Yeah. So we should all be over in the DERMS panel right now?
Yeah. Go ahead, Bill. And I think, the other issue there that you hit on, the ancillary services, is really the storage. Okay, and it was not that long ago that we were reading, oh, it's still way too costly. It'll be years and years. No, the dramatic increases in technology improvements and reduction of cost, to your point, is changing so quickly and so dynamically that everybody is kind of like paralyzed right now. And so for example, we're in Liberia with our microgrid solution there, where the cost of energy in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, where, by the way, there are 662 million people without access to electricity. Okay, twice the population of the United States. Okay, the price is 50 cents a kilowatt hour on a good day in Monrovia. Okay, and as you pointed out, the cost of solar and storage alone is a third of that. Okay, so I mean, this technology is transitioning our society. So what is happening is the utility is again playing catch up. We're trying to keep up with all these changes in the framework. So it is creating, back to your operational, it's creating lots of operational issues.
Yeah. Well, it seems like it would create some financial issues as well, right? Because if I'm listening to this as a utility executive, I'm terrified. Because if if everything is going to be, digital optimization of resources, and we're partnering for non-wires alternatives with new DER providers, actually, I was reading Navigant's thing. You guys predict that over the next 10 years, DERs will grow in capacity 8 times faster than central station renewables. Where's the utility going to make money in the future if they're not rate basing, as many or even, hardly any of these bulk power assets that, supported the business for 100 years?
Going right back to the business model, right?
Well, that's what it is. That's all about what it is.
That's what it is. Right? It's going right back to the business model. We in the energy cloud, we have three forward scenarios: a business as usual, kind of a midterm, and what we call the energy cloud scenario. And we show in that about a shift of $1 trillion in value, shifting from upstream generation to, say, behind the meter. Wow. And I think if you think about the business model and a lot of good points brought up about the barriers that we face today in breaking through that and getting more of the ability to go after that value and provide that value to customers. Setting aside a barrier like a meter and building them and providing additional services. I mean, that to me is how you're going to survive and thrive. Figuring out how to stitch these together, provide value to customers, and create these platforms to serve your customers in new and different ways.
What do you guys think the utility?
I think there's a real need to, as I talked about before, I think technology and the market are changing much faster than regulations are changing. So that creates an uneven playing field, right? It's not good for anyone. In a way, utility wants to transition and compete, but now if you have to file an application that takes a few years to get there, the market's already taken off. So it's really challenging to do that. And so I think we have to really work with regulator to figure out what is that new transition needs to be And we have to, as utility, bring good business case to it. It's not to say, hey, we're going to continue to rate base, but really look at the overall value that we're actually providing for consumers, for customers, and convince the regulator to really open up the competition better in a more organized fashion than the way that it's created today with a lot of time lag. And all of a sudden, you have rate structure that is supporting a lot of deployment that are artificial in terms of economics.
But if I may, Pat, how do you get paid for that? If you're gonna say, okay, we want to bring value to customers we're not going to do a substation upgrade. We're going to go with distributed storage.
Right.
What do you get as a utility for making what could be a smart decision to go with an NWA instead of a wires project? What's in it for you?
Right. So I think at the end of the day, right, someone will build and own those assets.
Yeah.
Right. So whether you own it and provide those services, today most of the utilities are not allowed to own storage. They are not allowed to sell and own solar rooftops. So that kind of prevented utilities to say, well, if I can't go there, the only thing I can focus on is pipes and wires. Right? What else is left? Right?
Bill, it looked like I cut you off.
I think, you're right. There's an evolution that has to change within the regulatory environment. Unfortunately, the regulatory environment will never be able to keep up with the speed of technology and change. But I think if you were asking about the utility and what should the utility do, and I think the utility has got to get involved. Again, I think every utility has a great opportunity because they have customers, okay? And your customers, think about it. If you have a connection with your customer, the customer is going to defer to you first, right? They're going to say, okay, well, what should I do? You're my expert, okay? So the utility has got to be involved. They've got to be able to engage with the customer and say, here's what we're doing. Here's what we're trying to do to keep costs down. Here's what's going on with technology. And yeah, it's a wild world. And maybe you should tell your legislator or whatever that, we could use some help here as far as allowing us to help you. Because right now, we have handcuffs on and they're not allowing us to help you. So those are some of the things, but it has to be engaged. The utilities are going to have to reach out. And we talk about, customers being on the edge, and my view is the customers are on the center, utilities on the edge. And if we want to be relevant for the next generation, we're going to have to get to where the customer is.
So when you say allow us to help you, does that mean as a regulated utility, you want to be the one who's supplying distributed energy resources, rooftop solar storage to customers? Or do you want to be a financing arm? Like what is... Well,
I think it's dependent on, again, there is no one global solution and answer, okay? But what it is if the utility is reaching out and has a specific issue and their customers want something, they should be able to make the case, look, we're trying to accommodate our members who we are required to serve, and they would like to have this solution from us. And you're preventing that. So, it defers the distraction or the arrows not coming to the utility, but going to where they need to be, which is we need regulatory change.
Dan, you look like you're on the edge of your seat here.
No, I'm enjoying listening to the conversation. I think one of the things that I've seen that utilities do very well, going back to the alternative non-wire solutions, is back 2015, 2016, we were working with Con Ed, helping them to design the BQDM demand response auction as part of their BQDM program. And that was a conversation with the regulator that at the time was very open, very supportive, and it felt very cutting edge. And the regulator gave them, if you read the order, quite a bit of latitude to design within a set of parameters, but to really push the envelope. And it was a fun project as a consultant, probably a fun project as the utility really getting to whiteboard things out. Just a couple of months ago, I went back and had lunch with that same team, and I was really floored by how this has now been institutionalized within the utility. And from planning to procurement all the way through the system, they can pump out a non-wire alternative, identification and then solicitation and and they're moving very quickly and it's all set up. And that happened from a whiteboard session to an engineered process in about 2.5 years. So I think to your point about allowing greater risk-taking and going to market faster, that there can be tremendous benefits, and the strength of those engineered processes can come to bear at scale.
Right. So I think at the same time, I always see things will get eventually to an equilibrium, right? Because there's no perfect one way or the other way. So if you look at utility, what's valuable in a utility, it is the pipes and wire, right? And when you look at the future where you have a lot of more individual customer, even residential, that owns power plant, their solar roof or their own storage. Now, the pipes and wires serve a function to support the peer-to-peer trading, because if I own some asset and I'm on vacation, I want to get some energy to sell to my neighbor or someone down the street to say, hey, I want to capture that value that I'm already installed. So part of the reason why Sempra participated in the initiative on blockchain for energy is really understand, well, how those transactions will occur in the future. How do we position ourselves to say, if we want to support something like that in the future, what has to happen? If I'm the one providing the connectivity to provide that service transaction, the utility now charging a wheeling fee on distribution, right? Today, there's no distribution wheeling in much of the utility world, but it happened in transmission. Why not distribution, right? So I think in the future, a lot can happen driven by customers, because the customer owns asset now that they say, hey, I want to get more value from my asset. What can I do?
I promised the other guys we wouldn't say the B word up here
Yeah, I was
today.
going to say, we're not going to talk
Earlier
about
today.
blockchain.
But I think it's a really apt example there. And just to kind of, so you think that in the future the utility might derive a lot of its revenue, or at least some, from charging fees on, like transaction fees on those peer-to-peer energy trading.
Right. Because you still need some pipes and wire in many cases, because today you still do not have wireless transfer of electricity in large volume. That laws of physics still stop us from doing that.
Yeah. Bill, I wonder if you had thoughts on that as well.
Well, I think that to go along with that, I think that the wheeling of energy over the distribution grid certainly provides a value. The balance sheet, right? The asset of the utility is the balance sheet. But I would argue that really the value of the utility is the customer, not the asset. I mean, assets can be bought and sold, and I mean, it has no real intrinsic natural value. Yeah, it facilitates. It's an enabler. It's like when we put fiber to the home. Okay, the fiber, yeah, it's an asset, but it's enabling the power of high-speed internet. Okay, and I would preach that the reality is the best value the utility can have is that customer, and providing services to that customer. Yeah, we have this asset, and yeah, we may be able to charge a little bit for it that's wheeling, but boy, if you connect with those customers, and if you can provide them services, they do trust you, and they know you're not going anywhere. And that's the reality today is this is going so fast that nobody has trust of anybody. Well, what's the one thing most utilities do have? They have trust with their customers. I mean, right? I mean, I'd like to think so. So I guess I get back to the issue is it's that transition of the value is in the service. It's not in the commodity.
Yeah, absolutely. So one last question before we open it up to the audience. Say I'm a state regulator and I'm thinking about this conversation and thinking about where the industry is going. What are some things that I can do to help my utility be more nimble, to help them take advantage of DER resources, and also spread the benefits not just to the relatively wealthy people who invest in DERs today, but also to to fulfill that paradigm of non-discriminatory service that the utility industry prides itself on. So that's a mouthful of a question, but who wants to take it on first?
Well, let me answer that first. If you're the legislator, I said we need to have a storage solution, okay, in Texas. And I know that, I know that there were some folks in here, but I mean, really, we need to. What are we going to do here? I mean, right now we're kind of in this limbo state. I know you were talking about the AEP battery storage. We're all sitting here waiting. Okay, so what's the deal?
Can you give us some background on that for people who don't?
Well, okay. Well, you did such a good job. I mean, it's his project. But I mean, yeah, there's a situation here in Texas where a traditional a solution or a transmission solution would cost $11 million or $12 million. There is a solution that would be a distribution solution with a storage, but it'd be like $2.5 million. But unfortunately, in Texas, the way the laws are written, battery storage isn't allowed because that's treated as a generator, and utilities aren't allowed to generate. So it gets into this really kind of convoluted, even though everybody in the room or everybody knows that, well, this is the best idea, the way the rules are written, it can't happen. So I guess that would be an easy one for me to say.
Yeah. Well, Pat, I don't think any of your regulators are in the room, so speak freely, sir.
Well, I think utility has to put together a business case to go to the regulator and make a strong case on why they need to be in those business to transition, because in the end, it's going to be for the benefit of the customers. Right. To say, hey, if there's lower cost technology, why are we not allowing the customer to access it? So I think it's really upon the utility to make the case for the regulators, because I think regulators are smart people too, right? So given the presented right information in front of them, they'll make the sound solution, to support you.
Yeah.
But you have to do the work to get there.
Very diplomatic, very tough love. Yes, I like it. I like it a lot. Dan, what do you think?
The business case, I would agree with it. It's also how that business case is framed. And if, you see a lot of business cases around a specific technology, it's not a love of the technology. It gets back to the value that you're going to provide through that platform or connected system back out to the customers. And I can't say, at least in my own personal experience going through this New York project, how much there is to be gained by having an open dialogue with a regulator outside of hearings and process, to have a communication channel around some of these issues, because I really do think it has an impact and helps to move a market.
And I know our regulators has gone over the world to look at other business model in UK, Australia, right? Well, the solution's already been practiced somewhere else. And I think we just need to learn the lessons from there to say, hey, what would be an organized transition as opposed to today it's not quite organized. The transition just happened. The markets and technology is driving it.
You don't find California organized and everything that's going on?
Well, I would say
You don't have to answer that question. Especially not in Texas. Well, I could sit with these guys for the rest of the afternoon, but let's shut me up. Who else has a question? I see Miss Allison Silverstein out there. What is your question?
Thank you. Speaking as an ex-Texas regulator, there are, every now and then regulators actually have to follow a statute. So it's not just about the rules. So the first step is go change the damn statute, which is not hard to do, even in Texas. But the second thing is that I want to make 2 points. One of them is that sometimes it is a failure of process imagination by the utility that creates the problem, because if you really wanted a piece of storage rather than to build a new transmission, I personally would put out an RFP so that someone else can provide the storage and get paid for it by the utility, so that you are not in the position of owning it, nor are you in the position of having to build the entire transmission alternative. RFPs are wonderful things. So the second thing I'd like to offer as an observation is that, I don't doubt that you all as a co-op have your customers trust you, and you probably wouldn't do much to violate that trust. Let me remind you that there are lots of other ways for services to be provided to customers and for products that are of value, and the utility is not always the appropriate provider. I mean, the reason we regulate utilities because as a nation, as a society, we don't tend to trust monopolies. And if I could, once upon a time, like utilities sold white goods, like refrigerators and ovens and air conditioners to customers, and folks like Sears, which existed once, thought that was a market that they should be in and that they could be in, and the utility was taking away market share. And that customers could probably get better deals by buying their refrigerator from Sears than they could from the utility. And the same exists for solar, and so on and so forth. So if I were a rural utility or a downtown utility that wasn't a co-op, that wasn't getting enough attention from competitors, again, RFPs are a really good way to achieve a competitive service and for my customers in a way that I am protecting them and meeting their needs both. It's something that you don't need to do, although you might be able to do a better job for your customers by putting some competition into the process for providing this service or these goods. But just saying, I'm Con Ed, trust me to do the right thing for you, hasn't always been a really valid exercise in the past, even though I'm sure y'all are blameless. But so just saying there are really good reasons why we have some of these restrictions, and I wouldn't just say I can do a good job for you, trust me. I mean, remember these days, any number of the organizations that we have trusted to protect our privacy are screwing that up pretty big too. So, and the data is probably more valuable now as something that you haven't yet tried to sell than anything else that you're in control of. So, don't just think that you're always going to be the best option for everybody. Thank you.
Yeah. Does anyone want to have a response to that?
Yeah, I like to add to. I like the idea of the RFP. Right? I support that. I think at the same time, if our focus really for the customer, the lowest possible cost or best quality of life for the customer. For example, in Hawaii, the utility want to also put in their own bid for a solution, but they're not allowed to do it. Well, why not? Why not have a third party do the evaluation? If it is the lowest cost solution, why not let the utility also bid on it? Because if you have existing infrastructure that you can leverage and provide a better service, why not? So I think we have to really open up our mind a little bit to say, hey, if it's truly open for competition for the right outcome, right? Let's be purposeful, focus on what is the right outcome. I think if we do that, the third party that can evaluate will do a much better job to say, hey, what is the objective? So that it's not just a utility making decision and pick and choose who would be winning the bid.
Anyone else?
If you start from the, I don't know if you want to take
Sure, we can take another question.
I was just getting, my only remark on that is I do think, if you're looking from the customer's point of view, you're going to see an increasingly large world of choice as entrants come in here. And, the utility is going, has a couple of tools, in its toolkit that it can use to engage, activate, and provide these services to that customer if that customer so chooses. And that's the tension that we're going to be playing with here, and opening up to partners and running RFP processes to get more competition into the mix is a good thing. And beside that, there will be a whole host of other options. So getting that value articulation, thinking from customer design backwards is, I think where our industry is going, and we're going to be meeting, when we get there, a whole host of other industries who've been there for quite some time.
Yeah, excellent. Someone right in the front here.
So I've been part of many of these dialogues over the last decade of utility of the future, but then we just go up to solar and wind and we stop with some batteries. I don't think that sustainability thing that you were speaking about is met. That standard is not met. We're just benefiting from a very low price of natural gas right now. There's a major bait and switch going on with renewable energy, where we talk storage, but swap and put natural gas. If this price doubles or triples, all bets are off on renewable energy and the unit cost. And that's going to happen the moment we have double hull ships to carry the natural gas to other places to sell. We just have a local market right now where it's between $2 and $6 for 1,000 cubic foot of natural gas. So my question is, there are small modular nuclear reactors on the horizon that are going to provide under $1 a watt kind of power, continuous power for 2 years, none of this intermittency. There's also plasma arc furnaces and decentralized desalination plants that utilities can get into to produce fresh water. I mean, look at California, it's sitting next to an ocean and it's having fires because there isn't enough water. I mean, look at the irony of this. We still haven't delinked ourselves from precipitation in the 21st century. And plasma arc furnaces to do 100% recycle of complete waste. You don't need to use chemical-based recycling. So what I'm saying is the utility of the future, if we really want to move to services, needs to move into desalination, needs to move into plasma arc furnaces, power with SMRs, take the renewable energy and make hydrogen out of it, use the hydrogen for transportation and for peaker units, so you don't need any natural gas, no batteries, no demand response. That is future. I don't understand this solar and wind and battery combo. That is not a through street. From a sustainability perspective, if you look at the raw materials that batteries use, and scale it to 7 billion people, we can't afford it. They tell me, oh, we're going to bring a new technology for batteries. Well, show me. All it takes...
Sir, I'm sorry, we're a little bit over time, and I want to give them...
Yeah.
Already, I want to give them a chance to respond.
So what I'm asking is, the question that I have is, what about the social blowback of one of these megawatt-hour size batteries in the event of a fire like Sonoma and Napa? The pulverization of the battery that will occur and the COPD from that. Where do we go from there?
Do we have a response to the indictment of wind, solar, and
Yeah, I always love challenges, right? So I think we have to look at the perspective of it's not always the best technology win, because there's always political, social, and environmental factors that you have to play into. Hey, what is acceptable for quality of life of people? And it could be fear, it could be other factors that play into the technology. So you really have to factor all that in to say, at the end of the day, what's affordable for people to implement? It's not say, hey, of course I can produce a lot of hydrogen today, but at $14 MMBTU compared to $2 gas. Well, no one's going to buy hydrogen because of that, right? So we really have to say, hey, can you actually bring cost of hydrogen down? Well, when we look at long-term high volume production, they can only get down to $4. Then you say, okay, still not quite economical, maybe to power the car maybe, but not large volume use. So I think it's not always the best technology will win. We really have to look at, we have a lot of existing infrastructure also play into the role on, how do we actually transition from one point to another? Because it's not a step change, right? Everything is, a little bit more evolution than revolution that can occur, particularly in the energy industry.
I just simply say, just never underestimate the power of low capital cost. Regardless of the technology, the power of low capital cost, goes a long way.
Well, I think that's about all the time we have, and I think we could talk about especially that aspect of the future utility, SMRs versus renewables and storage, for hours and hours more. I will point out that there are some jurisdictions that are looking at trying to pull back on the gas a little bit. Arizona actually is talking about a moratorium on gas plants. They've set one for this year, and they're thinking about moving toward more renewables and storage. So I'm all SMRs, if and when they come, be great, but talking to people in DC, sometimes the question is a little bit more if rather than when. I think that's an open question that we'll have to talk about at next year's ETS. So let's thank our panel: Bill Hetherington, Patrick Lee, Dan Bradley.